I would like to welcome Partha on the stage with his speaker bio. So here's some details about Mr. Partha. So Partha loves to wear many hats. Currently, he's a software professional, educator, and a researcher. Currently, he's working with Salesforce India Private Limited, contributing to product accessibility and inclusive design. He's also pursuing his doctoral studies at BITS Goa campus at the intersection of digital accessibility, computing, education, and software engineering. Before joining Salesforce Private Limited, he has worked in multiple roles at SAP Labs. So I now request Partha to come on stage, and it's over to you, Partha.
Thank you, Asha. Thanks, Rakesh, for touch basing on the important topics right at the start. So let's get started. So I'll talk about digital accessibility education using serious games, game-based learning, and so on. So firstly, let's get started, right? So firstly, I'll talk about me. So as Asha introduced, so I love to wear multiple hats. So currently, I wear 3 predominant roles or 3 hats. So the first one being a software professional. I'm an accessibility SME at Salesforce Private Limited here in Bangalore. And as I also mentioned, maybe over the past decade, I've been involved in a lot of roles, right from software development, security management, and UX advocate and so on. And then I moved to accessibility because of a personal incident, which a couple of you might know, where I had met with an accident, and maybe for a good 3-4 months, I faced a situational disability. Right, so I was not able to operate my computer. I was not able to do anything at all. And I started using a couple of assistive tech. And that is when I realized that I was not able to use any of them, right? And by this time, I had already completed a master's from BITS I was already working, but I had no clue even how to use an assistive tech. And the learning curve was really high, right? And then I went back. I was okay in maybe 4 to 5 months. I started my job. But what I also did was I started talking to a lot of people with disabilities on their usage of assistive tech, right? So how comfortable are they? How was the learning curve? How are they feeling it? And so on. And what I also felt was a lot of people were not using assistive tech, right? Although it is readily available. For example, a screen reader in all of our mobile phones are free of cost, right? But still, any guesses how many percentage of visually impaired users use a screen reader in India? Any guesses? 5%. Yeah, so it's less than 1%. Yeah. So, but it's built into all of our Android phones on iOS and so on, and it is free of cost. But one of the major reasons that users told were that the learning curve is very high, right? So that is when I decided that life happens, your job and your career happens, but there are millions of software engineers like mine, and this is what I want to do, right? So for a very few people, the purpose finds you, right? So that is when, so till then I had not done any accessibility work, right? So although I was working as a software engineer, I had no clue about accessibility principles, the whole inclusion phenomenon and so on. And that is when I started into this whole role of accessibility, right? And then I also do some amount of teaching. I'm associated with BITS Pilani's WILP division. And the third role I play in as a researcher, which is more of a PhD candidate. And today's talk would be focused more of wearing this hat, right? So I'll not be talking about what I do at Salesforce or what I do in the teaching sector, but I'll mostly focus about the research part of what I'm doing in accessibility and education and software engineering, right? So quick agenda, we will keep it short. So I'll talk about digital accessibility and computing education, which is nothing but computer science education. And I'll also talk about my research journey so far, and also about what our group focuses in BITS Pilani. So first things first, our current status of digital accessibility, right? So all of us are aware that WebAIM, which is Web Accessibility in Mind, conducts surveys every year, which is the state of the art of, what is the current state of accessibility, right? So as per our 2024 report, 95.9% of world's top 1 million websites do not offer full accessibility, right? And this has been the norm for over the past 5 years, right? So all the years consistently it has been inaccessible, say 95.9, 96.2 and so on, and things have not improved quite a lot. It has improved in maybe decimals, right? So this was the very first thought for my whole journey into, doing research in accessibility, that why is this happening, right? So tons of websites, our day-to-day apps that Rakesh mentioned, they're not accessible. What is the core reason behind, right? So if we delve deep into this problem a little bit, right? So Teach Access is a non-profit organization in the US who conduct constant surveys around why is this problem happening. And the last year's results tell that only 2% of the organizations felt that it is easy for their company to recruit accessibility professionals, right? Of course, companies want to build an inclusive environment. They want to create accessible apps. But if they want to do so, they might have to hire experts. But only 2% of them are able to find experts in this space, right? Another finding from the same report, right? Only 3% of the existing workforce has accessibility knowledge who can drive the torch inside their companies, right? Again, numbers are less than 5%, right? So if we again go deep into this problem as to why is there lack of awareness or why are they not experts, right? We're talking about Gen AI and security, AI, ML, data science and whatnot. But this is pretty fundamental, right? So equal access is pretty basic, but the numbers are just 2%, 3% and so on. So if we again go deep into this problem, in particular, the computer science curricula, right? So the 3-year, 4-year, 5-year programs may be engineering, science or whatever. So these curriculum, which is ought to prepare our software professionals, hardly cover accessibility topics, right? So in the complete curricula, we are absolutely not teaching about accessibility at all, right? So there are concepts around web development, mobile development and so on, but we don't teach about accessibility anywhere in the curricula, right? So this is a typical computing education research problem. And of course, we can solve this at a higher level of the stack also. Maybe you can create accessibility overlays. You can, write some AI code which can automatically make things and so on. But as accessibility experts, we all know that that is not the right direction. And born accessibility or shifting left is our, goal, right? So fundamentally, I believe a permanent solution for this is to teach people about accessibility, inclusion, and sensitize them to this. And this is where my journey started. A quick clarification: there are two related terms here. I would want to clarify that. So one is teaching accessibility, and another is teaching accessibly, right? So there's a very clear distinction between them. So the first one, which is teaching accessibility, is about teaching accessibility, its principles, the various guidelines around accessibility and so on to students, right? Typically computer science students and software design students. Whereas the second one, which is teaching accessibly, right? Which is a very broad umbrella, which is about making our whole education system more inclusive, right? So it is not just confined to computer science, but it concerns with more of universal design principles and also making sure that, our teaching materials are accessible and we are catering to, diverse, user-centric learning and say neurodivergent learners and so on. So my focus for my research currently, for my PhD work, is on the first one, which is about teaching accessibility and its principles to CS students majorly. But I also work on a couple of other related work on teaching accessibly, which maybe at the end I'll touch upon. So my first journey started here. Maybe I started my PhD 4 or 5 years back, around 2020, 21. And the very first step I started was to do some literature survey, right? So what is all the research that is going on in this direction? What about other countries, right? So it is not a problem unique to India, right? So across the globe, there is a fundamental issue that we don't teach enough of these to our students. And once they become professionals, they're not mindful about it. But there are existing literatures, but all of them from the West. There wasn't a single study from India on accessibility in the education sector, right? So that's when I started this. And there was this question as to, is accessibility even there in the curricula or not, right? So just for the context for a lot of audience, there are bodies like IEEE, ACM and so on, who create a model curricula for the whole world, right? So for a typical computer science program, ACM and IEEE will come together and create a model curricula for every 10 years. And then every country starts adopting it, maybe modifies it, and then it trickles down to every state, every university, and so on. And in all of these model curriculas, there is evidently accessibility being there as a core part, right? So there is knowledge areas, there are specifications about what to teach in accessibility. But then what is the missing gap, right? So why are we not doing it? So we started looking at the India level model curricula, which is by AICTE, and there is no mention about accessibility, right? So there is a little bit of mention about inclusive design, but there is nowhere about accessibility. So that is where my investigation as a researcher started. So I wanted to do 3 investigations first as to what are students' opinions on accessibility, right? So higher education in particular, and what are teachers' opinions, right? So why are they ignoring this very important topic of accessibility? And what about industry professionals, right? 3 separate studies. So as a very small thought experiment, what we did at BITS Pilani was we conducted an inclusive thinking questionnaire, right? It was a very simple thing. It was in the mid of pandemic and vaccinations going around and so on. We had given a very simple thought experiment use case that all of you folks have to develop a solution where people can verify if you have got vaccinated or not. So now come up with all the stakeholders involved. How would you test this app? Who are all your potential users and so on? And we got results that only about 4% of them spoke about some form of accessibility or people with disabilities. But of course, the numbers were higher for a lot of other India-specific issues like access to technology, literacy, and about language barriers. They told we will develop our app in multiple languages and so on. But accessibility in itself was not coming out. But this was an initial start, so we published some of these works and thought this is a good stage to actually maybe modify some of our courses and teach about accessibility in them, right? And one of the first experiments that we did was there's a typical course in computer science called mobile app development, right? So most universities have this. We teach about Android programming, we teach about Swift programming and so on. Basically, students are aided to create mobile applications. So in this particular course, we tried to modify this whole course, and me and my advisor, just revamped the whole course and made accessibility as the theme of the whole course, right? So right from the beginning till the end of the course, there are rubrics, there are quizzes around accessibility. The apps that they develop as a part of this course, they will incorporate accessibility. There's peer feedback and so on. And we were able to, achieve quite a bit of good results. Significant number of people considered accessibility at the end of the course. And all students were also able to identify accessibility issues in our day-to-day apps, right? So as Rakesh mentioned, we have personally filed a lot of, maybe we have reached out to those companies. There are also lawsuits going on and so on, which are our day-to-day apps, which are lacking accessibility features, right? So we also took some screenshots of these, gave them in exams and asked them, are you able to identify issues? Are you able to propose the fixes for these and so on? So definitely as an instructor and as a researcher, this is a known field for us, right? So we have done an intervention, we have been able to achieve some small success, right? But what was also interesting in these results was the third result where a lot of students developed empathy towards the challenges faced with people with disabilities, right? So when we designed this course, this was not even a learning outcome. We had not expected this, right? At the end of the course, when we did some qualitative studies and so on, students felt more, empowered that this is something that I'll have to take care when I'm developing any software, right? From my own portfolio websites and any app. So this was a byproduct of our work where empathy was instilled. Again, we published some work in some international forums. And the second work that we also started doing was, okay, one course we have done it, but not every college, not every university might be doing mobile app development. Maybe in other courses also, let's instill about accessibility, right? So we started doing that by there are courses which are core to computer science, which any computer science student does, like operating systems, where they learn about various operating systems, how they function and so on. And in one of those courses, the course that I was teaching, I instilled accessibility, taught them about accessibility in the course, and all of our operating systems has certain accessibility features built into it for free of cost. So we also spoke about how do they, act as a, equalizer, how are they, enabling equal access and so on. But another interesting finding here, what has happened is I taught this course somewhere around 2022. And maybe 1 year after they graduate, right? When I spoke to those, same students, only 40% of them have cared about accessibility, right? So this is again a little concerning that just talking about accessibility, teaching them inclusivity in one course is not going to work, right? So we are supposed to reiterate this in several other courses, maybe like a complete blend in the curricula, right? A typical example is cybersecurity, right? We just don't have one course. Across the curricula, we talk about encryption in some place. If there's a networking course, we talk about network security and so on. So it is very finely blended across the curricula, right? And we also started teaching this in software engineering projects and so on. So this was the student side, right? What about the teacher side, right? So there is already some studies in the US and in Switzerland about who's teaching accessibility, right? At a higher education level. Their results were staggering that even at US, only 2.5% of teachers are teaching accessibility. So we wanted to do a similar study in India, where we sent out surveys to 3,000 plus faculties in India who are typically teaching in higher education, in particular about computer science, right? And also we conducted some semi-structured interviews and so on. And less than 1% of them were teaching accessibility, right? So now the whole cycle is complete, right? So we now understand that we're not teaching enough. So it's not the problem with the student. Once they become a software engineer, they don't know about it. And all of us know, right? So we all fight for accessibility in our organizations, where we talk to engineers, we tell them what is the bug, how do you go about fixing it, and so on. Because inherently they don't know about it, because we don't teach about it, right? So then the next question was, why are we not teaching, right? So a very common barrier is that it is not a core part of the curricula, right? So people argue that, as a computer science student, I want to learn web development, software design, and so on. This is not the core part of it, right? And we will have to change this narrative, right? Because at the end of the day, any software is for people and developed by people, right? If you're not caring about inclusion and equal access, there is even no point in developing such a software, right? So this has to change. The second part, which was also very evident, was teachers themselves told, we don't know enough about accessibility. We have also not been trained on it. So we cannot teach this in the curricula. We might need support materials, resources, and other interventions to teach about this, topic. And then there was also another point where teachers pointed out that disability etiquette is lacking, right? So you cannot expect a computer science professor to directly start teaching about web accessibility guidelines, WCAG, and so on, because the other claim was that students are not even sensitized to the different types of disabilities. Then how do I directly teach about, all technology and, testing suits and so on, right? So now if you observe, the problem is slowly trickling down to a kindergarten to 12th standard level, right? So the exact same thing that Rakesh told, like we're bringing kids and all these to these events because we want to sensitize them from childhood as to what different disabilities are, what is assistive technology, the disability etiquette and so on, so that later we could, go into in-depth accessibility, right? So this was some of our studies, which again we published that, in the whole of Global South, in particular in India. So any idea how many computer science students are studying currently in university in India? Yeah, approximate numbers. We are the world's number one in, the number of people who graduate. Yeah. Yeah, it is 2 million. Yeah. It is 20 lakh people every year who graduate out of computer science. Yeah, it can be engineering or BCA, MTech, MCA, whichever elite areas, but 2 million students, right? It's a massive workforce. So the next thing that we did was with software engineers. So there are 3 studies that we did, right? So one was on students, one was with teachers, one is with professionals, right? So with professionals, again, we sent out with, some NASCOM connections, we sent out surveys to over 15,000 people. And things were very clear that over 75% of respondents felt that they lacked accessibility skills. And all of these are working professionals, by the way, right? They're all working in different software companies. But apart from accessibility SMEs, the other software engineers are not aware about accessibility, right? Within the same company as well. There was also this, complaint that formal education did not help them, right? Of course, they don't know about this. Again, we published this in international forums of, software engineering and such conferences. And something unique that I had done at Salesforce, maybe a year back or so, maybe Samyukta might know, is we had done something called as communities of practice, right? So we took around 66 software engineers. We told them, you're into 2 groups now. One of them will self-learn about accessibility. The other group will participate in something called as a communities of practice, where they often come together maybe every week once. They meet the accessibility SMEs. We all sit together, discuss about inclusion, accessibility, and so on. And this did a very tremendous job, right? So just like Rakesh told, people started acting as accessibility allies, right? So we taught 33 of them using these communities of practice. They started teaching their teams and so on. And this is the first time where we have taught accessibility using this, this is a very age-old approach of, where people come together to practice an art or a craft, and slowly they start believing and they start involving themselves, and it also becomes an identity for them, right? So even in this crowd, we were able to see that for folks like us, this is our profession, but other software engineers who joined us slowly developed this skill, and they also felt this is their identity and started doing accessibility more and more, right? Again, similar results, we had published this in some forums. And this is where I was stuck with this thing that this is good for the communities of practice, but what about the other self-learn participants, right? So usually there is no good results with massive online coaching and so on, right? Where hundreds of hours of coaching you give them. And again, teaching software professionals is a completely different ball game, right? So all of you professionals who work in the industry, do you like days of workshops and trainings? Do you attend those? Yeah, just, click away, just submit it. I want to get away, this compliance and all that. So again, that was a interesting challenge, because to motivate someone to learn something completely from scratch to a moderate or expert level, and who is already earning their paycheck, is really tricky, right? So that is when I thought of this idea where I wanted to bridge one intervention which can be suitable for both students as well as working professionals, right? What could that be, right? So that is where I was wondering. And there is a lot of work around game-based learning, right? So in a lot of fields like healthcare, military, and so on, there are games that train both professionals and students, right? So I nailed this, and this is called serious games. So sounds like an oxymoron, right? Like, how can a game be serious? But of course, there are a lot of games like that, which is, they're not just for pure entertainment, right? So the player enjoys the game, you play the game, but after you complete playing the game, you've actually learned something out of the game, right? So such games are called serious games. So that is what I started doing, where there are, for each personas, basically students and software professionals, I am designing games under 3 umbrellas or 3 major buckets, right? So the first type of games are just to sensitize people and create awareness around the whole field of inclusion, disability, accessibility, and so on, right? Because as I just mentioned, someone cannot directly start learning about guidelines and testing and so on, right? So this is common for all professionals and all students. This is not, again, this is department agnostic, right? Even HRs can learn about this field, even, other department students apart from computer science can learn about this. This is generic for everyone, right? The aim of this type of games, this bucket, is to first sensitize and make students and professionals aware about accessibility. And then the second bucket goes a little more deep for computer science professionals, where we teach about the web content accessibility guidelines, right? So these are again games, by the way, right? So these are all games that the player will play, but after playing the game, they will realize about these guidelines and how important they are and so on. And then the final bucket, which is where we teach about a little higher level of cognition, where now what are the different accessibility issues and challenges people with disabilities face, how to fix them, and so on. So if someone who goes through all the series of games, right? At the first, they get sensitized, they're more aware. Then they actually learn about intricate practices, how to make something accessible. And then they also now know how to identify accessibility issues around and how to fix them, right? So for each of these buckets, I have started already creating some games. I've been, putting these into practice in terms of experiments, where in the first bucket, I've created something called Burst the Myth, right? So there'll be a lot of bubbles coming, and there are facts and myths about, people with disabilities and accessibility, right? So there are very common myths that I have seen, right? So well-educated people who are working in the industry, there are very common myths that how does a visually impaired person use a mobile, right? I don't think people watch movies, right? So such very common myths are floating around, right? So this game will eliminate all those myths and facts about these. The second game that I'm developing is 2D games, right? So it's a little lengthy game, but it is intended for software professionals and computer science people, where the game itself would teach about these guidelines, right? So what is, the WCAG guidelines, and what are the different principles of accessibility and so on. And by the time they complete this game, they are now already aware of accessibility. They've got sensitized, they know the guidelines. So the last bucket is more like a bug bash game where we give them some small code snippets. They'll have to identify issues. They'll have to propose, fixes for that. They get, some points. There's a leaderboard, things like that. So all these games are already under, practice. So I follow something called as design-based research, which is very typical in software engineering as well, where we develop something, we put it into practice, we conduct some research studies, we see if this is even fruitful or not. And based on these feedbacks, we again improvise the game itself and again put it into practice and so on, and across demographics, right? We cannot just do it in one college or one city. Across the country, across the globe, we might have to do this. So those are things that are already, ongoing. So this was about my work, and it was all about my PhD work so far, which is about teaching accessibility, right? But now our group at BITS Pilani, I think there are very, very few groups across the country, researchers who work on this line of intersection, where Dr. Swaroop is my advisor, and we have a couple of other PhD candidates and a couple of undergrads, and some other projects which falls into the other umbrella, where we initially spoke about teaching accessibly, right? So in those spaces, there are plenty of opportunities. All of them can be, separate problems that each of us could target, which is, can visually impaired students do science? Yeah. Yes, definitely. Are they doing science today in India? Yeah. Hardly. Yeah. Exceptions, right? So the thing is, they might have done their education abroad and things like that, and they again come back and work in science. But there are regulations in India which are a barrier to visually impaired students to do science. It is, of course, slowly changing. Yeah, it's, of course, slowly changing. So some things that were put forward was books were not accessible and so on. So from IIT Delhi, there's this retired Professor Bala, who have created tactile books and NCERT books which are compatible with assistive technology across the STEM, right? They've already done that. But what is left is the labs, right? So that is one of the problems that my group works on. Just undergraduates, 20-year-olds, we just mentor them. So we are creating smart devices as small as maybe just put Braille in all the lab devices, right? At least you enable them to know what are the different chemicals in which bottles and so on. And then the next step is towards, say, measurement and so on. We have already developed some, small solutions. We put it out to practice. We have some tie-up with, schools, special schools. We test it out. Another type of, in this direction of teaching accessibly, right? So computational thinking, which is becoming, our everyday activity. Anyone who's not into CS also needs to know about computational thinking, and it has been a part of our life, right? From using smart devices, washing machines, and so on. But nobody has yet tackled this problem of how do you teach computational thinking to, say, people with cognitive disabilities, right? So this is something that we are working on. And real-time sign language translation, right? There are solutions out there, but nothing does the job well yet. So we are again taking experts like, sign language interpreters, annotating data sets, can we have a real-time app, right? There are a lot of sign language interpreter apps that are already available, but they all work with the American Sign Language, right? So Indian Sign Language is really special and it has a vast vocabulary, which is not yet captured. So these are some work that we do on the other segment of, teaching accessibly. We also have some, faculty development programs across the country on how to make your class inclusive. Right? So we are very far away from there. But one good news, at least, I was sharing this with Rakesh a couple of months ago, is there are 2 documents that the Ministry of Education has released, both very comprehensive, 300 plus pages of PDFs. One of them for school education, one of them for higher education, which talks completely about accessibility, right? So I'll be happy to share after these sessions. So right from the physical school, the campus, and about, their academics, about their assessments, right? So the complete process, and this is, of course, a part of the NEP vision of, say, 2030, 2040. And both of these documents also have a very interesting line that all these schools that we're talking about, we have more than 50,000 higher education colleges, right? Not all of them might have accessibility or inclusion expertise, right? So we cannot just, tell that there's a regulation, now go ahead and make your college or school, inclusive. It's not possible, right? So there are actually guidelines in these documents telling that, seek help of experts, right? So there's already a lack of expertise, but try to reach out. So I think that is where all of our roles come in, right? So this is where I want to end my talk with all of us are inclusion allies here, right? We will have to maybe say adopt a couple of colleges, universities where we mentor them on how to go about, right? This is a long-term vision, right? So with that request, I end my talk. So I'm available in all these social connects, like, on Twitter, and, my website is also pretty straightforward. My full name, parthasarathipd.com. So yeah, any questions? We can take it now or maybe during our, break. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Definitely. So I'm a big fan of open source. I'm not patenting any of these. So the point here is I'm currently doing design-based research, which is I put it into practice into control groups, right? 50 people, 100 people, getting feedback and again improving the game. I think once it is in a stable state, and I think we are planning. So I have already, created this website, learndigitalaccessibility.com. So all these games and repositories would be freely available in that. Yeah. And also supporting materials for teachers on how to use these games, right? So they cannot just tell the students go play games, right? So it should be a part of their existing courses. We'll tell them these type of games go into your first year courses. These type of games go into your, say final year courses and so on, right? But that's the eventual direction. Yeah, you had a question.
Yeah, it's a pleasure knowing about all of this, and
Thank
it
you.
was fun and educative. While I understand we're trying to bring education system into place with this accessibility game,
Right.
what do we do about the existing population? How are we going to attend that? Because that is also a very key value area where we need to be addressed.
Right.
And while there are these 300-page documents and all of this well documented, problem is nobody has the time to go through
Yeah,
it.
nobody even knows it. Yeah.
Nobody even knows
Yeah.
it, and nobody has the time to go through it.
Right.
So with the new age TikTok concept where attention span is really what matters.
Right.
So how do we bring the attention span into the game? And how do we bring that attention to the current existing audience? And how we can take that game forward?
Perfect. Yeah, very good question. Thank you so much. So, yeah.
Answer the question, I think for the people who are asking questions as we go forward, please introduce yourself. So the people who know about this.
Yeah, my name is Ankur. I used to be a mobile application architect, but now I'm 90% visually disabled, had kidney issues. Now through the transplant, I am able, and this is my first meeting after that. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Cool, thank you so much. So that's a wonderful question which came into my mind once I started developing these, right? Because all of us are, so I'm professionally trained as a computer science student. I am not very comfortable with the learning sciences or the attention span. How do you develop these games and so on? So in 2024, I have started getting in touch, and I'm doing a fellowship with IIT Bombay, which is the only institute in the country which has a separate department for learning sciences, right? About education technology, learning sciences, and so on. So this is a big game, right? I mean, getting a thesis is not, that is not my end goal, right? As you just told. So I have already, taken a couple of instructional designers, and there is a pipeline of things as to how to make these games more engaging and how to make it to the public available, right? So because these games, again, one game cannot fit in for the whole masses, right? So some games could be suitable for children, some could be for adult learners and so on. So I'm in constant touch with them. So I'm often also, doing some fellowships there. I often sit there and remotely work with Salesforce. So last month I was there. So I've gathered a group of people that, this is our common vision. So I'm open to all the inputs and let's start developing. There are again two outcomes that came out of it is that, so there's a professional comic designer who is at IIT Bombay. So they were telling, why not do some comics every week or every month and release this in the public forum, right? Maybe as newsletters or maybe in the mainstream newspapers, right? So just have comics or shorts or other type of medium. So all of these are targeting the first bucket, right? Because that is where first we want to get to. So my PhD would be a long-term game, right? So the first part is where we want to sensitize people and so on. So that is where I'm taking help of these students. The second and third are pretty straightforward, right? I mean, giving code lines, asking engineers to find bugs, fixing them, and that is our code. We know how to do that. But the first part of hitting masses, sensitizing them, so that is where I'm taking and help of all these professionals. So the plan is also that so if you might not be aware, there is EdTech Society in India, right? So it was formed 2-3 years back. So the whole community there thinks about outreach and about education, learning as a science and so on. So I'm a member of that. So we are planning that every year we will conduct these type of symposiums and other faculty development programs, which can aid them to create content for their own geography and spread it across and so on. Because all these games cannot be played across the country, right? So these are all based on storylines, right? What might be appealing for someone in a rural place might not be appealing for someone, maybe sitting in a high-tech city, right? So that's the eventual plan that, facilitate these type of things and make, a lot of allies who can propagate this info.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on all of those points.
Yeah.
And yeah. So I'll just pass on the mic. I'll connect with you later.
Sure, we'll have a break, right? Yeah, go ahead. You just take the mic, maybe. Right.
So, but now we are in the age of artificial intelligence.
Right.
So now even a lot of organizations started doing teaching accessibility through artificial intelligence.
Right.
Interestingly, Microsoft has come up with some AI-based robot to teach even mathematics, right?
Right.
So how are we, keeping the vision, so now the balancing the artificial intelligence versus gamification.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah. So first things first, I see AI as an enabler, right? So first things first, it is coming in the solution space, right? So how should we do it? But there is also a first problem as to why should we do it? I don't think AI can do that by, sensitizing people. Why should I do, accessibility and so on, right? So the games and these part will play a vital role in the why part, right? Everyone in the room here knows, but we'll have to take this room bigger and bigger. Maybe everyone knows why should we do